The old woman's final words pierced Jack's soul like shrapnel, shattering everything he thought he knew about himself. In that moment, as smoke and sirens filled the air, the firefighter realized his entire life had been built on a lie. The piercing wail of sirens cut through the frigid night air as Jack Thompson raced toward the inferno that had engulfed the Sunset Grove retirement home. Flames licked hungrily at the sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the snow-covered streets. The acrid smell of smoke burned his nostrils, a familiar scent that always sent his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and determination. As the fire engine screeched to a halt, Jack leaped out, his boots crunching on the icy pavement. He took in the scene with practiced efficiency. Panicked residents huddled in blankets, paramedics tending to those overcome by smoke, and his fellow firefighters already battling the blaze. "Thompson, second floor, West Wing." Captain Ramirez's voice boomed over the chaos. "We've got residents trapped." Jack nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins as he donned his breathing apparatus. This was what he lived for, the chance to make a difference, to save lives that hung in the balance. As he charged toward the burning building, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. Was this need to rescue others rooted in his own unresolved past? Pushing the introspection aside, Jack plunged into the smoke-filled corridor. The heat was oppressive, even through his protective gear. Flames danced along the walls, and the building groaned ominously around him. He moved with purpose, checking rooms systematically, his trained eyes piercing through the thick smoke. "Fire department, call out if you can hear me." His voice echoed in the emptiness, each unanswered call increasing the weight in his chest. Then, barely audible over the roar of the fire, he heard it, a feeble cry for help. Jack surged forward, following the sound to a room at the end of the hall. The door was jammed, warped by the intense heat. "Stand back," he shouted, before ramming his shoulder against the obstruction. Once, twice, on the third attempt, the door gave way with a splintering crack. Through the billowing smoke, Jack saw her, an elderly woman huddled in the corner, her frail form shaking with each ragged cough. Time seemed to slow as their eyes met. There was something hauntingly familiar about her gaze, a connection that Jack couldn't explain but felt deep in his bones. Pushing the unsettling feeling aside, he moved swiftly to her side. "I've got you, ma'am. We're getting out of here." His voice was steady, reassuring as he scooped her into his arms. The woman's fingers clutched weakly at his jacket as he navigated the treacherous path back through the burning building. Jack's muscles strained under the added weight, but his determination never wavered. Each step was a battle against the encroaching flames and the groaning structure threatening to collapse around them. As they burst out into the cold night air, Jack's partner, Mike Rodriguez, rushed to meet them. "Nice work, Jack. Let's get her to the paramedics." But something was wrong. The woman's grip on Jack's arm had tightened, her eyes wide with a desperate intensity. "Wait," she wheezed, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to tell you." Jack leaned closer, an inexplicable urgency compelling him to hear her words. The noise of the chaos around them faded away as the woman's gaze locked onto his. "My son," she gasped, each word a struggle. "I finally found you. Forgive me that single quotes." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jack stared at her, uncomprehending, as the implications of her words crashed over him like a tidal wave. It couldn't be true. It had to be the ramblings of a smoke-addled mind. And yet, "Jack, we need to move." Mike's voice cut through the fog of confusion, snapping Jack back to the present crisis. Numbly, he transferred the woman. Could she really be his mother? To the waiting paramedics. As they whisked her away, Jack stood rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. The carefully constructed walls he'd built around his past began to crumble. Memories and emotions he'd long suppressed, threatening to overwhelm him. "Thompson, get your head in the game." Captain Ramirez's sharp command jolted Jack back to reality. "We've still got a job to do." Forcing the turmoil down, Jack threw himself back into the fray. For the next several hours, he worked tirelessly alongside his team, battling the blaze until the last ember was extinguished. But even as his body moved with practiced efficiency, his mind was in chaos. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the smoldering ruins of Sunset Grove, Jack found himself sitting on the bumper of the fire engine, exhaustion seeping into every muscle. The woman's words echoed in his head, refusing to be silenced. Mike approached, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. "Hell of a night, huh?" he said, offering one to Jack. "You okay, man? You seem off." Jack accepted the coffee grateful, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. He stared into the dark liquid, debating whether to voice the thoughts swirling in his mind. Mike had been his partner for years, the closest thing to family he'd ever known. If he couldn't trust Mike, who could he trust? "That woman I rescued," Jack began, his voice low. "She said something impossible." Mike's brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean?" Jack took a deep breath, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "She said she was my mother." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of cleanup crews and murmuring voices. Mike's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to worry. "Jack, come on," he said gently. "You know how it is with smoke inhalation. People say all kinds of crazy things. She was probably delirious." Jack nodded, wanting to believe it was that simple. But the nagging feeling in his gut told him otherwise. "Yeah, you're probably right," he conceded, not meeting Mike's eyes. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his life had irreversibly changed. The carefully constructed identity he'd built for himself, dedicated firefighter, loyal friend, man without a past, suddenly felt like a house of cards on the verge of collapse. In the days that followed, Jack threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, taking on extra shifts and volunteering for the most challenging calls. His colleagues noticed the change, exchanging worried glances when they thought he wasn't looking. But Jack ignored their concern, focusing solely on the next rescue, the next life to save. It was during a rare moment of downtime at the firehouse that Captain Ramirez approached him, concern etched on his weathered face. "Thompson, a word in my office." Jack followed, his stomach knotting with apprehension. As he sat across from Ramirez, he braced himself for a reprimand about his recent behavior. Instead, Ramirez's voice was uncharacteristically gentle. "Jack, I've known you for a long time. You're one of the best damn firefighters I've ever worked with. But lately, something's off, and I can't in good conscience let you out in the field if your head's not in the game." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but Ramirez held up a hand. "I'm not benching you, but I'm strongly recommending you talk to someone. Dr. Chun, our department psychologist, has an opening this afternoon. I want you to see her. Single quotes." The idea of talking to a shrink made Jack's skin crawl. He'd spent years building walls around his emotions, keeping the pain of his past safely locked away. The thought of dismantling those defenses was terrifying. But as he looked at Ramirez's concerned face, Jack realized he had little choice. His job, the one thing that gave his life meaning, was on the line. Reluctantly, he nodded. "All right, Cap, I'll go." That afternoon, Jack found himself sitting across from Dr. Emily Chun, a petite woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence. The office was warmly lit, with soft furnishings designed to put patients at ease. But Jack felt anything but relaxed, his body tense as if preparing for battle. "So, Jack," Dr. Chun began, her voice calm and non-judgmental, "why don't you tell me what's been going on?" For a moment, Jack considered deflecting, giving some vague answer about job stress. But something in Dr. Chun's patient gaze broke through his defenses. Before he knew it, the whole story came tumbling out. The woman's startling claim, the doubts and questions that had plagued him ever since, the memories of a childhood spent bouncing between foster homes. As he spoke, Jack felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. It was as if by voicing his fears, he was finally allowing himself to confront the emotions he'd spent a lifetime suppressing. Dr. Chen listened attentively, occasionally asking a general question to probe deeper. When Jack finally fell silent, she leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Jack, what you're experiencing is completely understandable," she said. "This revelation, whether true or not, has shaken the foundation of your identity. It's natural to feel confused, angry, even scared." Jack nodded, surprised at how accurately she'd pinpointed his swirling emotions. "But here's the thing, Doctor," Chun continued. "This situation, as difficult as it is, also presents an opportunity to confront your past, to understand yourself better, and perhaps to find a sense of closure you've been missing." Jack's brow furrowed. "How do I do that, Doctor?" Chen's smile was gentle but encouraging. "That's something we'll work on together. But the first step is to acknowledge that it's okay to feel what you're feeling. You don't have to have all the answers right now." As Jack left Dr. Chun's office that day, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since that fateful night. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional landmines, but at least now he had a guide to help him navigate it. Little did he know, the journey he was about to embark on would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his past, and the very nature of family and forgiveness. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Each therapy session with Dr. Chun peeling back another layer of his carefully constructed defenses. The woman he had rescued, Sarah Miller, had survived the fire but remained in critical condition at Mercy General Hospital. Jack couldn't bring himself to visit her, torn between a desperate need for answers and a paralyzing fear of what those answers might reveal. One crisp autumn morning, Jack stood before the mirror in his small apartment, studying the face that stared back at him. He'd always prided himself on his self-reliance, on being a man without a past. Now, that very lack of history felt like a gaping wound. His green eyes, which he'd always assumed came from some nameless, faceless donor of DNA, now held the possibility of a connection, a lineage he'd never dared to imagine. The shrill ring of his cell phone cut through his reverie. It was Mike, his voice tight with concern. "Jack, you need to get down to the hospital. Sarah Miller, she's asking for you." Jack's heart hammered in his chest as he made his way to Mercy General. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridors brought back memories of his own stays in such places as a child, always alone, never with a worried parent by his side. Now, he was walking towards a room where someone claimed to be that missing piece of his past. Outside Sarah's room, Jack hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. Mike appeared at his side, a steady presence in the storm of Jack's emotions. "You don't have to do this alone, man. I'm here if you need me." Taking a deep breath, Jack nodded gratefully and pushed open the door. The sight that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat. Sarah lay in the hospital bed, looking frail and vulnerable, a far cry from the determined woman who had gripped his arm so fiercely on that fateful night. Her eyes, however, were alert and fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "Jack," she breathed, her voice weak but filled with a lifetime of emotion. "You came." Hesitantly, Jack approached the bed. Up close, he could see the family resemblance he'd been too shocked to notice before. The same square jaw, the same slightly upturned nose. It was like looking at a roadmap of his own future, etched in the lines of her face. Why? The question escaped him before he could stop it. Years of pent-up hurt and confusion pouring into that single word. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Jack, I have so much to explain, so much to ask forgiveness for. But please, believe me when I say that giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done." As Sarah began to speak, Jack found himself transported back to a different time. She painted a picture of a young, scared woman trapped in an abusive relationship, desperately trying to protect her newborn son from a violent father. The decision to leave Jack at a fire station, she explained, was made out of love and a desire to give him a chance at a better life. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I never stopped looking for you, never stopped hoping that someday, somehow, I'd find you again." Jack listened in stunned silence, emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to rage at her, to demand why she hadn't tried harder, why she had condemned him to a childhood of loneliness and uncertainty. Another part, a part he'd long thought dormant, yearned to reach out, to embrace the mother he'd never known. As Sarah's story unfolded, Jack found himself sinking into the chair beside her bed, his defenses crumbling. She told him of her escape from his father, of years spent looking over her shoulder, afraid that he would find them. She spoke of the guilt that had consumed her, the endless nights spent wondering where Jack was, if he was safe, if he was loved. "I never stopped loving you, Jack," Sarah said, reaching out a trembling hand. "Not for a single day." Hesitantly, Jack took her hand in his. The contact sent a jolt through him, a connection to a past he'd never known and a future he'd never imagined. As he looked into Sarah's eyes, his eyes, he saw a lifetime of regret, hope, and unconditional love. In that moment, something shifted within Jack. The anger and resentment that had been his constant companions for so long began to give way to something else, understanding and the faintest glimmer of forgiveness. As he left the hospital that day, Jack's world had tilted on its axis. The certainties he'd clung to for so long had been shattered, replaced by a maelstrom of conflicting emotions and unanswered questions. Mike, true to his word, was waiting for him outside. "How'd it go?" Mike asked, concern evident in his voice. Jack ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find the words. "It's complicated. She told me everything, Mike, about my father, why she gave me up. I don't know what to think, how to feel." Mike nodded, placing a comforting hand on Jack's shoulder. "That's okay, man. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just know that I'm here, whatever you need." As they walked to the parking lot, Jack felt a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying start to lift. He wasn't alone in this. He had Mike, he had Dr. Chung, and now, in some strange, unexpected way, he had Sarah. Over the next few weeks, Jack found himself drawn back to the hospital, spending hours by Sarah's bedside. Each visit peeled back another layer of their shared history, filling in the blank spaces of Jack's past. He learned about his grandparents, long since passed, about the musical talent that ran in the family, explaining his own inexplicable ability to pick up any instrument, and about the stubborn streak that had helped both him and Sarah survive their respective hardships. As Sarah regained her strength, their conversations deepened. Jack found himself sharing stories of his own life, his struggles in the foster system, his decision to become a firefighter, the family he'd found in his colleagues. With each shared memory, each vulnerable moment, the chasm between them narrowed. One afternoon, as golden autumn light streamed through the hospital window, Sarah reached for Jack's hand, her eyes serious. "There's something else I need to tell you, Jack. Something I've been afraid to say." Jack tensed, bracing himself for another revelation. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Your father, he's alive, and he's been looking for us." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. His father, the violent, abusive man Sarah had fled from, was out there, searching for them. The implications sent his mind reeling. Was he a threat? Did he know about Jack? And most disturbingly, did Jack want to know him? As if reading his thoughts, Sarah squeezed his hand. "You don't have to decide anything now, Jack. I needed you to know, to be prepared." Jack nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you for telling me," he managed, his mind already racing with the potential consequences of this new information. As he left the hospital that day, Jack felt the weight of his newly discovered past pressing down on him. The simple narrative he'd constructed for himself, abandoned child turned heroic firefighter, had been irrevocably complicated. Now, he was a son, with a mother who loved him and a father who was a looming question mark. Walking through the crisp autumn air, Jack found himself at a crossroads. The path forward was unclear, fraught with emotional pitfalls and potential danger. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't facing it alone. He had Sarah, he had Mike, he had his team at the fire station, and somewhere out there, for better or worse, he had a father. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jack made a decision. He would face whatever came next head-on, with the same courage and determination he brought to every fire he fought. Because now, he wasn't just fighting for strangers. He was fighting for his family, for his past, and for the future he never knew he could have. Little did Jack know, the challenges that lay ahead would test him in ways he could never have imagined, forcing him to confront not only his newfound family, but also the very foundations of his identity and purpose. The revelation about his father hung over Jack like a storm cloud in the days that followed. He threw himself into his work with renewed intensity, as if the heat of the flames and the rush of adrenaline could burn away. the confusion and fear that threatened to overwhelm him. His fellow firefighters noticed the change, exchanging worried glances when they thought he wasn't looking. It was during a particularly grueling shift that everything came to a head. The call came in just before dawn, a 5-alarm fire at a downtown apartment complex. As Jack and his team raced to the scene, the sky was painted in shades of orange and red, mirroring the inferno they were about to face. The scene was chaos incarnate. Flames licked hungrily at the night sky, while panicked residents streamed out of the building, some clutching precious possessions, others wearing only their nightclothes. Jack's training kicked in automatically, his body moving with practiced efficiency as he and Mike began their sweep of the building. They had nearly cleared the 3rd floor when they heard it, a faint cry coming from behind a closed door. Jack's heart raced as he shouldered the door open, memories of his rescue of Sarah flashing through his mind. Through the thick smoke, he saw a small figure huddled in the corner, a young boy, no more than 6 or 7, clutching a stuffed animal to his chest. As Jack approached, the boy looked up, his eyes wide with terror. In that moment, Jack saw himself reflected in those frightened eyes. A lost child, alone and afraid. The weight of his own past and the uncertainty of his future crashed over him like a tidal wave. For a split second, Jack froze, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of emotion. It was Mike's voice, urgent and concerned, that snapped him back to reality. "Jack, we've got to move." Shaking off his momentary paralysis, Jack scooped the boy into his arms. "I've got you, buddy," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "We're getting out of here." The journey out of the burning building was a blur of heat, smoke, and adrenaline. As they burst out into the cool night air, Jack's legs gave way, and he sank to his knees, still clutching the boy to his chest. Paramedics rushed forward, gently prying the child from Jack's arms. As the boy was led away to a waiting ambulance, Jack remained on the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Mike knelt beside him, concern etched on his face. "Jack, talk to me. What happened in there?" Jack looked up at his partner, his eyes haunted. "I saw myself, Mike, in that kid. All alone, scared. I couldn't move. I almost failed him." Mike's expression softened with understanding. "But you didn't fail him, Jack. You got him out. You saved him." As the adrenaline of the rescue faded, the full impact of what had transpired hit Jack like a physical blow. He had allowed his personal turmoil to affect his performance on the job, the one area of his life where he had always felt confident and in control. The realization shook him to his core. Captain Ramirez approached, his face a mask of concern and disappointment. "Thompson, my office. First thing tomorrow morning." Jack nodded numbly, knowing that his actions could have serious consequences. As he watched the flames being slowly brought under control, he felt as if his entire world was similarly engulfed, with no clear path to extinguish the blaze. The next morning, Jack sat across from Captain Ramirez, the weight of the previous night's events heavy on his shoulders. Ramirez's voice was stern, but not unkind. "Jack, I can't ignore what happened last night. You hesitated in a critical moment. In our line of work, that can be the difference between life and death." Jack nodded, unable to meet his captain's eyes. "I know, sir. I take full responsibility." Ramirez leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. "Look, Jack, I know you've been going through something personal lately. I don't need to know the details, but I can see it's affecting you. I'm placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. "Captain, please. The job is all I have. I can't." "This isn't a punishment, Jack," Ramirez interrupted. "It's a chance for you to sort things out. Get your head straight. I need you at 100%, and right now, you're not there." As Jack left the captain's office, he felt untethered, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The firehouse had been his anchor, his purpose. Without it, he was forced to confront the turmoil he'd been trying so hard to avoid. With nowhere else to go, Jack found himself at Mercy General, standing outside Sarah's room. He hesitated, his hand on the door handle, before finally mustering the courage to enter. Sarah's face lit up when she saw him, but her smile quickly faded as she took in his haggard appearance. "Jack? What's wrong?" The concern in her voice, so maternal, so foreign to him, broke something loose inside Jack. Before he knew it, he was pouring out the whole story: the fire, the boy, his suspension. Sarah listened with rapt attention, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and something deeper, more primal, a mother's love. When Jack finished, Sarah reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry you're going through this. But maybe this is an opportunity." Jack looked at her, confused. An opportunity for what? Sarah's grip on his hand tightened. To face your past. To confront the things you've been running from, including your father. The mention of his father sent a jolt of fear and anger through Jack. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's eyes were filled with understanding and a strength that surprised Jack. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be right there with you, every step of the way." As Jack left the hospital that day, he felt a strange mix of fear and determination. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with emotional landmines, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had Sarah, he had Mike, and he had a chance to finally confront the demons that had been chasing him for so long. That night, as Jack lay in bed, unable to sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of the past and the uncertain future, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. With trembling fingers, he opened the message. "Hello, son. It's time we talked." Dad, the 5 simple words sent a shockwave through Jack's system. His father, the man he'd never known, the source of so much pain and confusion, was reaching out. The moment Jack had both dreaded and secretly longed for had finally arrived. As the weight of the situation settled over him, Jack realized that he was standing on the precipice of a life-changing decision. He could ignore the message, continue to run from his past as he had for so long, or he could take a leap into the unknown, confronting the man who had cast such a long shadow over his life. With a deep breath, Jack made his choice. He began to type a response, his fingers shaking slightly as they moved across the screen. Where and when? As he hit send, Jack felt as if he had just lit a fuse. Whatever happened next would irrevocably change the course of his life. But for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt ready to face it head on. The die was cast. The confrontation that had been brewing for a lifetime was about to unfold. And Jack Thompson, firefighter, son, man in search of his past, was stepping into the flames of his own history, unsure of what he would find on the other side. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the tumultuous emotions swirling within Jack. He had barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities and fears about the impending meeting with his father. The response to his text had come swiftly, a time and location for later that day. As Jack went through the motions of his morning routine, every action felt weighted with significance. He studied his reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for traces of the man he had never known. The strong jaw, the set of his eyes, were these gifts from his father or traits he shared with Sarah? A knock at the door startled Jack from his reverie. He opened it to find Mike standing there, concern etched on his face. "Thought you could use some company," Mike said, holding up a bag of bagels and a tray of coffee. Jack felt a surge of gratitude for his friend's unwavering support. As they sat at Jack's small kitchen table, the normality of sharing breakfast provided a brief respite from the emotional storm brewing inside him. "So, you're really going to meet him?" Mike asked, his tone careful. Jack nodded, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee mug. "I have to, Mike. I spent my whole life running from this. It's time I faced it head on." Mike reached across the table, clasping Jack's shoulder. "You're one of the bravest men I know, Jack. You've got this. And remember, I'm just a phone call away if you need me." As the appointed time drew near, Jack found himself standing outside a small cafe in a quiet part of town. His heart raced, and he could feel sweat beading on his palms despite the cool autumn air. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a few patrons scattered at various tables. Jack's eyes were drawn immediately to a man sitting alone in the corner. As their gazes met, Jack felt a jolt of recognition. The man, his father, stood slowly, his movements cautious, as if approaching a wild animal. Jack, the man said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm Richard, your father. For a moment, Jack stood frozen, unable to move or speak. A lifetime of questions, of anger and hurt and longing welled up inside him. Finally, he managed to find his voice. Why now? He asked, the words coming out harsher than he intended. Why after all this time? Richard gestured to the chair across from him. Please sit. I owe you an explanation. I owe you so much more than that, but it's a start. Hesitantly, Jack took a seat. Up close, he could see the toll the years had taken on his father. Richard's face was lined with age and what looked like regret. His eyes, so similar to Jack's own, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Jack, Richard began, his voice low. The biggest was letting my anger and my demons drive away the people I loved most. Your mother, I've spent years trying to make amends, to become someone worthy of being your father. As Richard spoke, painting a picture of a troubled man consumed by addiction and rage, Jack felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. He had spent so long imagining his father as a monster, a faceless embodiment of all the pain and abandonment he had experienced. But the man sitting across from him was just that, a man, flawed and human. I don't expect forgiveness, Richard continued. I know I haven't earned it, but when I heard about the fire, about how you saved Sarah, I knew I couldn't stay away any longer. I needed to see you, to tell you how proud I am of the man you've become. Despite everything, Jack's emotions warred within him. Anger at the years of absence, a desperate longing for the father he never had, and a cautious hope for what might be possible. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said honestly. I don't know if I'll ever be able to see you as my father, but I'm willing to try to understand. A look of profound relief washed over Richard's face. That's more than I deserve, he said softly. Thank you, Jack. As they continued to talk, the years of separation slowly began to melt away. Jack learned about his paternal grandparents, about the struggles Richard had faced and overcome. In turn, he shared stories of his own life, his career as a firefighter, his recent discovery of Sarah, the complex emotions he was grappling with. Hours passed unnoticed, the cafe emptying and filling again around them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the table, Jack realized that something fundamental had shifted inside him. The meeting hadn't erased the pain of the past, but it had opened the door to a future he had never imagined possible. As they prepared to leave, Richard hesitated, then pulled out a small, worn photograph from his wallet. I've carried this with me every day, he said, handing it to Jack. It's the only picture I have of the three of us together. Jack stared at the faded image, a much younger Richard and Sarah, smiling down at a tiny bundle in Sarah's arms. His throat tightened with emotion as he traced the outline of his infant self, held in the arms of parents who, despite their flaws and mistakes, had loved him. Thank you, Jack said, his voice thick, for this and for today. As they parted ways, the promise of future meetings hanging between them, Jack felt as if a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. The anger and resentment that had been his constant companions for so long began to give way to something else, understanding and the faintest glimmer of forgiveness. That night, as Jack lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How did it go? Jack stared at the message for a long moment, trying to find the words to encapsulate the emotional journey of the day. Finally, he typed out a response. It was a beginning. As he drifted off to sleep, Jack's dreams were filled with images of fire and rescue, but this time, he wasn't alone. Sarah and Richard stood beside him, a united front against the flames of the past and the uncertainties of the future. The next morning, Jack woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in weeks. The meeting with Richard had stirred something deep within him, a desire to reconcile not just with his newfound family, but with the parts of himself he had long kept hidden. With newfound determination, Jack reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. Dr. Chun? It's Jack Thompson. I think I'm ready to dive deeper into our sessions. There's a lot I need to work through. As he hung up, Jack felt a sense of optimism wash over him. The road ahead was still uncertain, fraught with emotional challenges and unresolved issues. But for the first time in his life, Jack felt equipped to face those challenges head-on. With the support of the family he was slowly piecing together. Little did he know, the journey of self-discovery and reconciliation he was embarking on would test him in ways he could never have imagined, forcing him to confront not just his past, but the very foundations of his identity and purpose. As the weeks passed, Jack found himself navigating a new and complex emotional landscape. His sessions with Dr. Chen became a lifeline, a safe space to unpack the tumultuous feelings stirred up by the re-entry of his parents into his life. The therapist's office became a sanctuary where Jack could voice the fears and doubts he'd kept bottled up for so long. "It's like I'm building a puzzle," Jack explained during one particularly intense session. "But I'm not sure what the final picture is supposed to look like. Every time I think I've got it figured out, another piece appears." Dr. Chun nodded thoughtfully. "That's a very apt metaphor, Jack. Family relationships, especially in situations like yours, are rarely straightforward. It's okay to feel uncertain or overwhelmed. The important thing is that you're engaging with these feelings rather than running from them." As Jack worked through his emotional turmoil, he found himself drawn more and more to the hospital where Sarah was recovering. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the initial shock of their reunion to explore the nuances of their shared history and tentative future. One crisp afternoon, as golden autumn light streamed through the hospital window, Sarah reached for Jack's hand, her eyes serious. "There's something I need to ask you, Jack. Something I've been afraid to bring up." Jack tensed, bracing himself for another revelation. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath. "When I'm released from the hospital, I don't really have anywhere to go. My apartment was destroyed in the fire, and I was wondering if you might consider letting me stay with you, just until I get back on my feet." The request caught Jack off guard. He'd grown accustomed to their relationship as it was, contained within the safe confines of the hospital, with clear boundaries and limited time frames. The idea of Sarah in his space, a constant presence in his daily life, was both thrilling and terrifying. I don't know," Jack stammered, his mind racing. "It's a big step. I need some time to think about it." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I want you to know how much these visits have meant to me, how much you mean to me." As Jack left the hospital that day, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He found himself walking aimlessly through the city streets, trying to sort through his feelings. Without realizing it, his feet had carried him to the fire station. The familiar sight of the engines, the smell of smoke and polish, brought a sense of comfort. This had been his home, his family, for so long. Now, with his forced leave of absence, he felt like an outsider looking in. "Thompson!" A voice called out, startling Jack from his reverie. He turned to see Captain Ramirez approaching, a concerned look on his face. "How are you holding up?" Jack straightened, instinctively falling into the respectful posture he always adopted around his superior. "I'm working through things, sir. It's been a lot to process." Ramirez nodded, his expression softening. "Walk with me, Jack." As they strolled around the station, Ramirez spoke of his own struggles early in his career, of the toll the job could take on a person's psyche. "The thing is, Jack," he said, stopping to face his subordinate, "being a firefighter isn't just about physical courage. It's about emotional resilience. What you're going through now, it's making you stronger, even if it doesn't feel like it." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. "I miss it, Cap. The job, the team. It's been my whole life." Ramirez placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "And it will be again. But right now, your job is to take care of yourself, to build a foundation that will make you an even better firefighter when you return." As Jack left the station, Ramirez's words echoed in his mind. He realized that his captain was right. This forced break from the job wasn't just about dealing with his past. It was about building a future, one that could encompass both his career and his newfound family. With this realization came a sense of clarity. Jack knew what he needed to do. That evening, he found himself once again at Sarah's bedside. His mother looked up at him, hope and trepidation warring in her eyes. Before she could speak, Jack took a deep breath and said, "Yes." Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. "Yes? Yes, you can stay with me when you're released," Jack clarified, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. "It won't be easy. We have a lot to work through, but I want to try." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she reached for Jack's hand. "Oh, Jack, thank you. I promise. I'll do everything I can to make this work." As Jack left the hospital that night, he felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. He was stepping into uncharted territory, opening himself up to a level of vulnerability he'd never experienced before. But for the first time in his life, the prospect of facing the unknown didn't fill him with dread. Instead, he felt a cautious optimism. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity as Jack prepared for Sarah's arrival. He cleaned his small apartment from top to bottom, cleared out his spare room, and even bought a few houseplants in an attempt to make the space more welcoming. Each action felt like a step towards a future he'd never dared to imagine. The day of Sarah's release dawned bright and clear. As Jack helped her into his car, he couldn't help but notice how frail she still looked, how uncertain her movements were. A wave of protectiveness washed over him, surprising in its intensity. The drive home was filled with an awkward silence, both of them acutely aware of the magnitude of the change they were embarking on. As they entered the apartment, Jack watched Sarah's face carefully, looking for her reaction. Sarah's eyes roamed the space, taking in the neat furniture, the freshly painted walls, the new plants adding splashes of green. Her gaze lingered on a framed photo on the mantel, a group shot of Jack with his firefighting team. "It's lovely, Jack," she said softly. "Thank you for doing this." As they settled into a routine over the next few days, Jack found himself oscillating between moments of domestic comfort and periods of intense emotional turmoil. Having Sarah in his space, seeing her first thing in the morning and last thing at night, stirred up a complex mix of feelings he struggled to name. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, the TV murmuring softly in the background, Sarah turned to Jack with a serious expression. "I know this isn't easy for you," she said, "having me here, trying to be whatever it is we're trying to be. I want you to know how grateful and how proud I am of the man you've become." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm still figuring it out," he admitted. "What it means to have a mother, to have a family. It's a lot." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "We'll figure it out together, day by day." As they sat there in companionable silence, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead was still uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls and unresolved issues. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't facing it alone. Little did Jack know, the journey he was embarking on would test him in ways he could never have imagined. The delicate balance he was trying to strike between his past and his future was about to be shaken to its core, forcing him to confront not just his relationships with Sarah and Richard, but the very foundations of his identity and purpose. As the days turned into weeks, Jack and Sarah settled into an uneasy rhythm. Their shared living space became a crucible for their evolving relationship, each day bringing new challenges and unexpected moments of connection. Jack found himself caught between the instinctive urge to care for Sarah and the lingering resentment of years of abandonment. One morning, as Jack prepared for a therapy session with Dr. Chun, he heard a crash from the kitchen. He rushed in to find Sarah on the floor, surrounded by shattered ceramic and spilled coffee. "I'm sorry," she gasped, struggling to right herself. "I thought I could manage." Without thinking, Jack knelt beside her, carefully helping her up and guiding her to a chair. As he cleaned up the mess, he felt a surge of conflicting emotions: concern for her well-being, frustration at her fragility, and a deep-seated fear of loss he'd never allowed himself to acknowledge before. In Dr. Chun's office later that day, Jack found himself pouring out his confusion. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "One minute I'm angry at her for all the years we lost, and the next I'm terrified something will happen. How am I supposed to be a son when I never learned how?" Dr. Chun leaned forward, her expression compassionate. "Jack, what you're feeling is completely normal. You're navigating a relationship that has no roadmap. It's okay to feel conflicted. The important thing is that you're trying. that you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable. As Jack nodded, absorbing her words, Dr. Chun continued, I think it might be helpful for you to have a session with Sarah to create a safe space where you can both express your feelings and expectations. The idea of a joint therapy session filled Jack with a mix of apprehension and hope. That evening, he broached the subject with Sarah over dinner. To his surprise, she agreed readily, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'd like that, Jack. I want to understand you better, to know how I can be there for you now. The day of the joint session arrived, bringing with it a nervous energy that thrummed between Jack and Sarah as they sat side by side in Dr. Chun's office. As the therapist guided them through the session, years of unspoken feelings and misunderstandings began to surface. I feel like I'm always walking on eggshells, Jack admitted, his hands clenched in his lap. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing, of hurting you or being hurt. Sarah reached out, hesitantly placing her hand over Jack's. Oh, Jack, I'm scared too. Scared that I'll never be able to make up for the years we lost, that I'll never be the mother you deserve. As they continued to talk, laying bare their fears and hopes, something shifted between them. The air in the room seemed to lighten, as if a great weight had been lifted. By the end of the session, both Jack and Sarah were emotionally exhausted, but filled with a newfound sense of understanding. In the days that followed, their interactions took on a different quality. There was still awkwardness and uncertainty, but also a growing ease, punctuated by moments of genuine warmth. Jack found himself sharing more about his life, his work as a firefighter, the family he'd found in his colleagues. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Sarah turned to Jack with a wistful smile. You know, when you were a baby, you used to love watching the sky change colors. You'd giggle and point at the clouds. I've missed so many sunsets with you. Jack felt a familiar pang of loss, but it was tempered now by something else, a bittersweet recognition of the moments they were creating now. We're here now, he said softly. Maybe that's what matters. As autumn gave way to winter, Jack's mandatory leave from the fire department was nearing its end. The prospect of returning to work filled him with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He'd changed so much in the past few months. Would he still fit in with his old life? The night before his scheduled return, Jack found himself unable to sleep. He wandered into the living room, only to find Sarah already there, a mug of tea in her hands. Couldn't sleep either? She asked, patting the spot next to her on the couch. As Jack sat down, Sarah turned to him, her expression serious. I want you to know how proud I am of you, Jack. Not just for the work you do as a firefighter, but for the man you've become, for giving me a chance to know you. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. I'm glad you're here, Mom, he said, the word mom still feeling strange on his tongue, but right somehow. I'm not sure I could have gotten through all this without you. The next morning, as Jack donned his uniform for the first time in months, he felt a sense of coming full circle. As he prepared to leave, Sarah stopped him at the door, straightening his collar with a tender gesture that spoke volumes. Be safe out there, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jack nodded, feeling a surge of love and protectiveness. I will. I'll see you tonight. As he walked into the fire station, Jack was greeted with a chorus of cheers and backslaps from his colleagues. The familiar sights, sounds, and smells washed over him, but something was different. He was different. Captain Ramirez pulled him aside, his expression serious. Welcome back, Thompson. How are you feeling? Jack took a deep breath, considering the question. I'm ready, sir. More ready than I've ever been. As he settled back into the rhythm of the job, Jack found that his experiences over the past few months had changed him in unexpected ways. He approached each call with a new level of empathy, a deeper understanding of the human stories behind each emergency. One afternoon, the alarm blared, signaling a serious fire at an apartment complex. As Jack and his team raced to the scene, he felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, but it was tempered now by a newfound sense of purpose. The scene was chaos, flames licking at the sky, terrified residents streaming out of the building. As Jack plunged into the smoke-filled corridors, he heard a faint cry coming from one of the apartments. Breaking down the door, he found a young mother clutching her infant. terror etched on her face. In that moment, Jack saw flashes of his own story, of Sarah's decision to give him up, of the courage it must have taken. With gentle reassurance, he guided the mother and child to safety, feeling a profound sense of connection to the lives he was saving. As the fire was brought under control and Jack emerged from the building, soot-stained and exhausted, he caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd of onlookers. Sarah stood at the edge of the police tape, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pride. Their gazes met across the chaos of the scene, and in that moment, Jack felt the disparate pieces of his life clicking into place. He was his son, a firefighter, a man with a past and a future, and for the first time, he felt whole. As he approached Sarah, still in his gear, she reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines of soot. "I was so worried," she whispered, "but seeing you out there, I've never been more proud." Jack pulled her into a hug, not caring about the crowd around them. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I'm glad we're here together." As they pulled apart, Jack knew that the journey they had embarked on was far from over. There were still challenges to face, wounds to heal, and a lifetime of moments to share. But standing there, with the woman who had given him life and the career that gave him purpose, Jack Thompson felt ready to face whatever came next. Little did he know, the greatest test of his newfound strength and family bonds was yet to come, lurking just around the corner, ready to challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and the people he loved. As winter settled over the city, blanketing the streets in a soft layer of snow, Jack found himself settling into a new normal. His relationship with Sarah continued to evolve, growing stronger with each passing day. The awkwardness that had initially characterized their interactions had given way to a comfortable familiarity, punctuated by moments of genuine connection. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the TV murmuring softly in the background, Sarah turned to Jack with a hesitant expression. "Jack, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," she began, her voice tinged with nervousness. Jack felt a familiar flutter of apprehension in his stomach. "What is it?" he asked, bracing himself for another revelation. Sarah took a deep breath. "I was wondering if you'd be open to the idea of meeting your extended family. Your grandparents, my parents, they're still alive, and they've been asking about you. They've wanted to meet you for so long." The request caught Jack off guard. He'd been so focused on navigating his relationships with Sarah and Richard that he'd barely considered the existence of a larger family network. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. I don't know," Jack stammered, his mind racing. "It's a lot to take in. I mean, I've just gotten used to having parents, and now there are grandparents too." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I know it's a big ask, and you have every right to say no. I just thought, well, they're not getting any younger, and they love you so much, even though they've never met you." Jack felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Curiosity about these people who shared his blood, fear of more complications in his already complex life, and a deep-seated longing for connection he'd never allowed himself to acknowledge before. "Can I think about it?" he asked finally. Sarah smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Of course. Take all the time you need. There's no pressure, I promise." As the days passed, Jack found himself mulling over Sarah's request. He discussed it in his therapy sessions with Dr. Chun, who encouraged him to explore his feelings about expanding his family circle. "Remember, Jack," Dr. Chun said during one session, "you're in control here. You get to set the pace and the boundaries. If you decide to meet them, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can start small, see how it feels." With Dr. Chun's words in mind, Jack finally approached Sarah one evening. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, watching as hope flickered in her eyes. I think I'd like to meet them, but can we start slow? Maybe just a short visit?" Sarah's face lit up with joy. "Oh, Jack, that's wonderful. They'll be so thrilled. And yes, of course, we can take it as slow as you need." The day of the meeting arrived, bringing with it a nervous energy that thrummed through Jack's entire being. As he and Sarah drove to his grandparents' house, Jack found himself rehearsing what he would say, how he would act. It felt surreal, like he was stepping into someone else's life, The house was a modest suburban home with a well-tended garden and a porch swing that creaked gently in the winter wind. As they walked up the path, the front door opened, revealing an elderly couple whose features Jack recognized from his own reflection. "Jack," his grandmother breathed, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, my boy, you're finally home." The next few hours passed in a blur of emotions. Jack found himself enveloped in hugs, showered with love from people who had been waiting a lifetime to meet him. His grandparents shared stories of Sarah's childhood, showed him old photo albums, and asked countless questions about his life. As Jack listened to tales of family history, saw his own features reflected in the faces around him, he felt a profound sense of belonging wash over him. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of awkwardness, of pain when the years of separation were mentioned, but it was real, and it was his. That night, as Jack lay in bed reflecting on the day, he felt a shift in his perception of himself and his place in the world. He was no longer just Jack Thompson, orphan turned firefighter. He was part of a larger tapestry, a family with its own complex history and interconnected lives. The following weeks brought more family gatherings, each one easier than the last. Jack found himself looking forward to Sunday dinners at his grandparents' house, to the easy banter with cousins he was just getting to know, to the sense of continuity that came with being part of a multi-generational family. But as Jack's family circle expanded, so did the complications in his life. Balancing his newfound family relationships with his demanding job as a firefighter proved challenging. There were missed dinners due to emergency calls, family events cut short by the blare of his pager. One particularly hectic week, Jack found himself rushing from a grueling 24-hour shift straight to a family barbecue. As he arrived, still smelling faintly of smoke, he was met with a chorus of concerned questions from his relatives. "Jack, honey, you look exhausted," his grandmother fretted, pressing a plate of food into his hands. "Maybe you should think about taking it easy," his grandfather suggested, a worried frown creasing his forehead. Jack felt a flare of frustration. "I'm fine," he insisted. "This is my job. It's what I do." Sarah, sensing his discomfort, quickly changed the subject, but Jack could feel the weight of his family's concern throughout the afternoon. It was a new sensation, having people worry about him, want to protect him. Part of him appreciated it, while another part chafed against the perceived interference. That evening, as Jack and Sarah drove home, she broached the subject carefully. "They mean well, you know," she said. "They're just not used to having someone in the family with such a dangerous job." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. It's just, being a firefighter isn't just what I do. It's who I am. I don't know how to be anything else." Sarah was quiet for a moment before responding. "No one's asking you to be anything else, Jack. We're all so proud of you. We love you. And that means we worry." As they pulled up to their apartment, Jack felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Love, frustration, gratitude, and a lingering sense of unworthiness all swirled together in a complex cocktail of feelings. "I'm not used to this," he admitted softly. "Having people care so much, sometimes it feels like too much, you know?" Sarah reached out, squeezing his hand. "I know, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes. We're all still figuring this out together." As they walked into the apartment, Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Hey man, we still on for beers tomorrow?" Jack smiled, feeling a sense of balance restore itself. His old life and his new one weren't separate entities to be juggled. He realized they were all part of who he was becoming. The next evening, as Jack sat across from Mike at their favorite bar, he found himself opening up about the complexities of his new family situation. "It's amazing, don't get me wrong," Jack said, taking a swig of his beer. "But sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, you know? Like I'm playing a role I never auditioned for." Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Makes sense, man. You've gone from having no family to having this whole network of people in your life. That's a big adjustment." As they continued to talk, Jack felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. For all the new connections in his life, Mike remained a constant, a bridge between his past and his present. Little did Jack know, as he sat there laughing with his best friend, that the delicate balance he'd been struggling to maintain was about to be shattered. A crisis was looming on the horizon, one that would force him to confront not just his newfound family bonds, but the very core of his identity as a firefighter and a son. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Jack had learned about love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. And as the pieces began to fall into place, Jack Thompson stood unknowingly on the precipice of the greatest challenge of his life. The crisis that had been brewing beneath the surface of Jack's newfound family harmony finally erupted on a frigid February morning. The shrill ring of his phone jolted Jack awake, his heart racing as he recognized the ringtone he'd assigned to the fire station. "Thompson?" he answered, already throwing off the covers and reaching for his uniform. Captain Ramirez's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Jack, we've got a situation. Major fire at the Oakwood chemical plant. All hands on deck." Jack's blood ran cold. The Oakwood plant was notorious for its volatile compounds and complex layout. A fire there could quickly become catastrophic. "I'm on my way," Jack responded, his mind already shifting into emergency mode. As he rushed to get dressed, Sarah appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "What's happening?" "Big fire at the chemical plant," Jack explained tersely, lacing up his boots. "Could be bad." Sarah's face paled. "Oh, Jack, please be careful." Single quotes. For a moment, Jack hesitated. The worry in Sarah's eyes struck a chord he'd never felt before. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to have someone waiting for him to come home. "I will," he promised, giving her a quick hug before rushing out the door. The scene that greeted Jack at the Oakwood plant was nothing short of apocalyptic. Flames licked at the sky, thick black smoke billowing ominously. The air was acrid with the smell of burning chemicals, and the sound of explosions punctuated the chaos. As Jack suited up alongside his team, Captain Ramirez laid out the situation. "We've got workers trapped in the East Wing. Thompson, Rodriguez, you're up. Get in there and get them out." Jack nodded, adrenaline coursing through his veins. As he and Mike entered the inferno, the heat was oppressive, even through their protective gear. They moved swiftly through the smoke-filled corridors, calling out for survivors. They had just located a group of terrified workers when a thunderous explosion rocked the building. Jack felt the floor beneath him shudder ominously. "We've got to move," he shouted to Mike over the roar of the flames. "This place is coming down." As they guided the workers towards safety, another explosion sent debris raining down around them. Jack felt a sharp pain as something struck his helmet, but he pushed through, focused solely on getting everyone out alive. Outside, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Paramedics rushed to tend to the rescued workers, while firefighters battled to contain the blaze. Jack's head throbbed, but he ignored it, turning back towards the building. "Jack, wait!" Mike's voice cut through the noise. "You're bleeding." Jack reached up, surprised to feel warm wetness on his temple. But before he could respond, a cry went up from one of the rescued workers. "My daughter. She's still inside. Please, someone help." Without hesitation, Jack turned back towards the burning building. He could hear Mike and Captain Ramirez shouting after, but their voices faded as he plunged back into the inferno. The heat was even more intense now, the smoke thicker. Jack moved with purpose, his training kicking in as he systematically searched for the missing girl. Time seemed to stretch and compress, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, he heard it, a faint whimper coming from behind a partially collapsed wall. There, huddled in a corner, was a young girl no more than 7 years old. "It's okay," Jack soothed, reaching out to her. "I'm here to help. Let's get you out of here." As he scooped the girl into his arms, Jack felt the building groan ominously around them. He moved as quickly as he could, navigating through the smoke and debris, the child clinging tightly to him. They were almost at the exit when Jack heard the telltale crack of a structural collapse. Without thinking, he threw himself forward, shielding the girl with his body as part of the ceiling came crashing down. Pain exploded through Jack's back and leg as debris rained down on them. But through sheer force of will, he managed to push through, stumbling out into the open air just as another explosion rocked the building. As paramedics rushed forward to take the girl, Jack felt his legs give way. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Mike's panicked face looming over him. Jack drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of flashing lights, urgent voices, and the sensation of movement. When he finally came to, he found himself in a hospital bed, the steady beep of monitors filling the air. As his vision cleared, he saw Sarah sitting by his bedside, her face etched with worry and fatigue. When she noticed he was awake, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Jack," she breathed, reaching out to take his hand. "You had us so worried." Jack tried to speak, but his throat was dry and raw from the smoke. Sarah quickly helped him sip some water before continuing. "You've been out for 2 days," she explained. "The doctors said you have a concussion, some broken ribs, and a fractured leg, but you're going to be okay." Her voice broke on the last words, relief and lingering fear evident in her tone. As Jack's mind cleared, memories of the fire came flooding back. "The girl," he croaked. "Is she?" Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "She's fine, thanks to you. Her parents have been here, wanting to thank you personally." Relief washed over Jack, followed quickly by a wave of exhaustion. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt Sarah's hand in his, a tether to the world outside his pain. The next few days passed in a blur of medical tests, pain medication, and a revolving door of visitors. Jack's hospital room became a hub of activity, with his firefighting colleagues, his newfound family, and even the family of the girl he'd saved, all stopping by. It was during one of these visits, as Jack was surrounded by his grandparents, Sarah, and a couple of his cousins, that Captain Ramirez arrived. The captain's face was grave as he asked to speak to Jack alone. Once the room had cleared, Ramirez sat heavily in the chair by Jack's bed. "You did a hell of a thing, Thompson," he began, his voice a mixture of pride and concern. "That little girl is alive because of you." Jack nodded, feeling a swell of satisfaction despite his pain. This was why he'd become a firefighter, to make a difference, to save lives. But Ramirez wasn't finished. However, he continued, his tone shifting, "You also disobeyed a direct order. You put yourself at unnecessary risk." "I can't ignore that." Jack felt his heart sink. He knew the risks he'd taken, but faced with the choice again, he knew he'd do the same thing. "I understand, sir," he said quietly. Ramirez sighed, running a hand over his face. "Look, Jack, you're one of the best firefighters I've ever worked with, but I'm worried about you. This isn't the first time you've pushed the limits, taken risks that, well, that someone with more to lose might think twice about." The captain's words hit Jack like a physical blow. He thought about Sarah waiting at home, about his grandparents and the family he was just getting to know. For the first time, he truly understood what Ramirez was saying. "I'm not suspending you," Ramirez continued, "but when you're healed up, before you come back to active duty, I want you to take some time. Really think about what you want and whether the way you've been operating is sustainable." As Ramirez left, Jack found himself grappling with emotions he'd never experienced before. The thought of stepping back from firefighting, even temporarily, filled him with a sense of loss. It had been his identity, his purpose, for so long. But now, with his newfound family connections, he had to admit that the equation had changed. That night, as Jack lay awake in his hospital bed, he found himself at a crossroads. The path forward was unclear, fraught with difficult decisions and potential sacrifices. But as he thought about Sarah's worried face, his grandparents' love, and the little girl he'd saved, Jack realized that perhaps it was time to redefine what it meant to be a hero. Little did he know, the journey of self-discovery and redefinition he was about to embark on would test him in ways he could never have imagined, forcing him to confront not just his identity as a firefighter, but his understanding of family, duty, and the true meaning of courage. The weeks of recovery that followed Jack's injury were some of the most challenging he had ever faced. Confined to a hospital bed and then to his apartment, he found himself grappling not just with physical pain, but with an existential crisis that shook him to his core. Sarah had taken time off work to care for him, her presence a constant reminder of the newfound connections in his life. Jack found himself torn between gratitude for her care and a simmering frustration at his own helplessness. One particularly difficult evening, as Sarah helped him change the dressing on his leg, Jack's frustration boiled over. "I can do it myself," he snapped, pulling away from her gentle hands. Sarah recoiled, hurt flashing in her eyes. "I'm just trying to help, Jack." Jack immediately regretted his outburst, shame washing over him. "I'm sorry," he said softly. I'm not used to needing help, to being vulnerable like this." Sarah's expression softened. She sat on the edge of the bed, taking Jack's hand in hers. "I know this is hard for you, but Jack, accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Her words struck a chord deep within Jack. For so long, he had equated strength with self-reliance, with pushing himself to the limit. But now, faced with his own limitations, he was being forced to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about strength and vulnerability. As the days passed, Jack found himself opening up more, not just to Sarah, but to the rest of his family as well. His grandparents visited often, filling the apartment with warmth and the smell of home-cooked meals. His cousins dropped by with books and movies, providing welcome distractions from the pain and boredom of recovery. Even Richard, Jack's father, made an appearance. Their relationship was still tentative, fraught with unresolved issues. But Jack found himself appreciating the effort Richard was making to be present. One afternoon, as they sat together in awkward silence, Richard cleared his throat. "You know, Jack," he began hesitantly, "when I heard about the fire, about what you did, I've never been more proud or more terrified." Jack looked at his father, surprised by the raw emotion in his voice. "I was just doing my job," he said, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. Richard shook his head. "No, son, you went above and beyond. You risked your life to save that little girl. That's not just a job, that's who you are." As Richard's words sank in, Jack felt a lump form in his throat. For so long, he had defined himself by his job, by his ability to rush into danger without hesitation. But now, hearing the pride and fear in his father's voice, he began to see his actions through a different lens. It was during one of his therapy sessions with Dr. Chun that Jack finally verbalized the turmoil he was experiencing. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Being a firefighter, it was everything to me. It was how I defined myself, how I made sense of the world. And now," Dr. Chun leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Jack, your identity isn't solely defined by your job. It's shaped by your experiences, your relationships, your values. Being a firefighter is part of who you are, but it's not all you are." As Jack pondered her words, Dr. Chun continued, "Perhaps this is an opportunity to explore other aspects of yourself, to figure out who Jack Thompson is outside of his uniform." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Jack had spent so long defining himself by his ability to face danger, to save lives. The thought of finding purpose and meaning outside of that was daunting. But as the weeks passed and Jack's body slowly healed, he found himself doing just that. He discovered a passion for cooking, spending hours in the kitchen with Sarah and his grandmother, learning family recipes that had been passed down for generations. He developed a newfound appreciation for literature, devouring the books his cousins brought him and engaging in lively discussions about themes and characters. Most surprisingly, Jack found himself drawn to art. It started with idle doodling as he sat confined to his bed, but soon evolved into more serious sketching. He found that translating the images in his mind onto paper provided a sense of calm and focus he had previously only experienced in the heart of a rescue operation. One evening, as Jack sat on the balcony, sketchpad in hand, Sarah joined him. She peered over his shoulder at the drawing he was working on, a detailed sketch of a firefighter emerging from a burning building, a child in his arms. "Jack, this is incredible," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with admiration. "I had no idea you could draw like this." Jack shrugged, a bit embarrassed by her praise. "Neither did I, to be honest. It's just something I've been playing around with." Sarah sat beside him, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Jack, I've been thinking, have you ever considered using your experiences, your talent, to help others in a different way? Maybe working with kids who've been through traumatic experiences, teaching them to express themselves through art?" The suggestion caught Jack off guard. He had never considered using his experiences for anything other than firefighting. But as he turned the idea over in his mind, he felt a spark of excitement. I hadn't thought about it, he admitted. Do you really think I could do something like that? Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. Jack, I've seen how you are with kids. The way you connected with that little girl you saved. How you are with your younger cousins. You have a gift. And combined with your experiences and your artistic talent, I think you could make a real difference. As Jack continued to recover, the idea Sarah had planted began to take root. He started researching art therapy programs, reaching out to organizations that worked with children who had experienced trauma. The more he learned, the more excited he became about the possibilities. But even as he explored this new potential path, Jack couldn't shake the pull of firefighting. The thought of never again putting on his uniform, of not being there when people were at their most vulnerable, left a hollow feeling in his chest. It was during a visit from Mike that Jack finally voiced his conflicted feelings. I don't know if I can give it up, Mike, he confessed. Being a firefighter, it's not just what I do. It's who I am. Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. I get it, man, but maybe it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Maybe there's a way to combine your passion for firefighting with this new direction you're exploring. As they talked, a new possibility began to take shape. Perhaps Jack could find a way to bridge his two worlds, to continue serving as a firefighter, while also using his experiences and newfound talents to help others in a different capacity. The path forward was still unclear, fraught with challenges and unknowns. But for the first time since the accident, Jack felt a sense of hope and purpose. He was no longer just Jack Thompson, firefighter. He was Jack Thompson, son, artist, survivor, and potential mentor. As he stood on the balcony that night, looking out over the city he had sworn to protect, Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he was no longer facing it alone. With his family by his side and a newfound understanding of his own multifaceted identity, Jack was ready to step into the next chapter of his life, whatever it might hold. Little did he know, the greatest test of his newfound strength and sense of self was yet to come. A challenge that would force him to confront not just his past and his present, but the very future he was trying to build. As spring bloomed across the city, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility, Jack found himself standing at the threshold of a new chapter in his life. His physical injuries had healed, leaving behind scars that served as a constant reminder of the journey he had undergone. But it was the internal transformation that truly marked the difference between the Jack of before and the man he had become. The day of his return to the fire station loomed large, filled with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Jack had spent weeks preparing for this moment, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. He had made a decision, one that had been born from countless hours of reflection, therapy sessions with Dr. Chun, and heartfelt conversations with Sarah and his newfound family. As Jack donned his uniform that morning, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. The face that looked back at him was familiar yet changed, etched with new lines of experience and understanding. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Jack took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be." The fire station was abuzz with activity when Jack arrived. His colleagues greeted him with enthusiastic backslaps and warm welcomes, their genuine joy at his return evident in every interaction. But there was an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken question hanging in the air. Captain Ramirez called Jack into his office, his expression serious as he gestured for Jack to take a seat. "Welcome back, Thompson," he began. "How are you feeling?" "Good, sir," Jack replied, his voice steady. "I'm ready to be back." Ramirez nodded, studying Jack intently. "And have you given any thought to what we discussed about your future here?" This was the moment Jack had been preparing for. He leaned forward, meeting Ramirez's gaze squarely. "I have, sir, and I've made a decision. I want to stay on as a firefighter, but I'd like to propose a new role for myself within the department." Over the next hour, Jack laid out his vision to Ramirez, He spoke of his experiences during recovery, of the new skills he had developed, and the insights he had gained. He proposed a program that would combine his firefighting expertise with art therapy, aimed at helping both first responders deal with the trauma of their experiences and children who had been through fires or other catastrophic events. As Jack spoke, he could see Ramirez's expression shifting from skepticism to interest. When Jack finished, the captain was silent for a long moment, considering. "It's an ambitious proposal, Thompson," Ramirez said finally. "It would require significant changes to your role, additional training. Are you sure this is what you want?" Jack nodded, feeling a surge of certainty. "I am, sir. I believe I can make a real difference this way, both on the front lines and behind the scenes." Ramirez leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, I have to admit, I'm impressed. You've clearly put a lot of thought into this. I can't promise anything, but I'll bring your proposal to the chief. We'll see what we can do." As Jack left Ramirez's office, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Regardless of the outcome, he had taken the first step towards integrating all aspects of himself: the firefighter, the artist, the survivor, the son and grandson and friend. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Jack reintegrated into his firefighting duties while simultaneously working to bring his new program to life. There were moments of doubt and frustration, times when the challenges seemed insurmountable. But through it all, Jack found strength in the support system he had built. Sarah was there every step of the way, offering encouragement and insights. His grandparents beamed with pride at every small victory. Even Richard, in his own awkward way, expressed support for Jack's new direction. It was during a family dinner, as Jack shared the latest developments in his program, that he truly realized how far he had come. Surrounded by the love and support of his family, he felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. His grandmother reached out, patting his hand gently. "You know, Jack," she said, her eyes misty with emotion, "your grandfather and I always knew you were meant for great things. But watching you now, seeing the man you've become, it's beyond anything we could have imagined." Jack felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the love and acceptance radiating from every face around the table. This, he realized, was what it meant to be part of a family. It wasn't just about shared DNA or childhood memories. It was about people who supported you, challenged you, and loved you unconditionally. As the program began to take shape, Jack found himself facing new challenges and opportunities. He worked tirelessly, balancing his firefighting duties with the development of art therapy sessions and outreach programs. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, but with each small success, Jack's confidence grew. One particularly memorable day came when Jack led his first art therapy session with a group of children who had survived a devastating apartment fire. As he watched the kids pour their experiences onto paper, their fear and trauma transforming into vibrant colors and shapes, Jack felt a profound sense of purpose. A little girl, her face still bearing the faint marks of smoke inhalation, tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Firefighter," she said shyly, holding up her drawing. "I drew you. See? You're saving everyone." Jack knelt down beside her, his heart swelling with emotion as he looked at the crayon figure emerging from a blaze of orange and red. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "And you know what? You're the real hero here. You're so brave for sharing your story." As the weeks turned into months, Jack's program gained recognition not just within the fire department, but in the broader community as well. He was invited to speak at conferences, to share his unique approach to healing and resilience. It was at one such conference that Jack found himself face to face with an unexpected figure from his past. As he mingled with attendees after his presentation, a familiar voice called out his name. Jack turned to see an older woman approaching, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. It took him a moment to place her, but when he did, he felt his breath catch in his throat. It was Ramirez, one of his foster mothers from years ago. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if you remember me, but Mrs. Harris," Jack interrupted, surprising himself with the warmth in his voice. "Of course I remember you." As they talked, Jack found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought of the angry, lost boy he had been, of the man he had become, and he realized that every experience, every relationship, even the painful ones, had played a part in shaping him. Later that night, as Jack recounted the encounter to Sarah, he felt a sense of closure he hadn't even realized he needed. "It's strange," he mused. "For so long, I thought I had to choose between my past and my future. But now I see that it's all connected. Every part of my life, every person I've met, they're all threads in the tapestry of who I am." Sarah smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "And what a beautiful tapestry it is, Jack. I'm so proud of the man you've become, of the life you're building." As they sat together, looking out over the city Jack had sworn to protect, he felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and often painful, filled with unexpected turns and challenges. But standing on the other side, Jack Thompson knew that he had finally found his place in the world. He was a firefighter and an artist, a son and a mentor, a survivor and a healer. He was a man who had learned that true strength came not from shutting out the world, but from opening himself to love, to vulnerability, and to the infinite possibilities of human connection. And as the sun set on another day, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jack knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, he was ready to face them, not alone, but surrounded by the family he had found, the family he had chosen, and the family he had always been destined to have. The end of this chapter was just the beginning of a new one, filled with promise, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that Jack Thompson was, at last, truly and completely home. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!